Welcome to Grid Live Wrap Up, the Am Better Health 400, 3 wide. Then the caution comes out, race is over. Plenty to discuss about how that all shaked out. Plus, the thrifty Sydney 500 saw one driver sweep the weekend, make a big statement for the Supercar Series Championship. Joe San Diego here. And with me, we have Kobe Lambeth from Grid Tonight and Tanner Smith from the pitboxpress.com. A big thank you to our Patreon investors, Colin Deschelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew for investing in the Grid Network each and every month. Link in the video description. And Jason leads our leaderboard for the Buy Me a Coffee YouTube Super Chat. With 5, you too can invest in the Grid Network one time through Buy Me Coffee Super Chat or monthly through Patreon. Now, Tanner, this Am Better Health 400, the hype all week leading up to this about the 3 wide finish, about last year's finish, the history of Atlanta with the 3 wide finishes. They just get 3 wide, entering turn 3 when Carson Hofer pushed his cars in the middle, and then the caution comes out. Christopher Bell was just ahead of Carson Hocevar and Kyle Larson at the moment of caution. The crash behind them was triggered when Josh Berry got contact, turned into the outside wall. Not exactly a head-on crash, but it's just enough at an angle and just far enough ahead. He was running the top 5 a good portion of this race. So you had the field coming down. Several cars were involved, but it was still a pack. This wasn't like a traditional spread out field. So once again, here we are asking the question. This race ended under caution as the leaders were 3 wide. Did NASCAR make the right call?
I personally, if it was me, I would not have pulled the lever personally, but at the end of the day, it is up to NASCAR's discretion, whether we like it or not, when cautions are called. And I would really just like to see some consistency at this point. Because last week, as we discussed in the Daytona 500, throwing a caution or not throwing a caution would not have really altered the, results of that race. So you have tonight where I feel like a caution probably shouldn't have been thrown, and we get one and it ruins a finish. And I don't know about you, Joe, but there is nothing I love more than watching these drivers who, put their lives on the line and, go out there and risk it all. I would love for them to come to the line and sort it out amongst themselves. And I think we had a really good opportunity to see something like that happen tonight. And unfortunately, it kind of got taken from us and the drivers because we kind of determine races now when somebody can hit a button. And I really don't think anybody in the stands, I don't think anybody in the sanctioning body should want a race to end like that. So I don't know where they go from here, but I think the way that they should go about it is by perhaps introducing some form of specific policies that are hyper specific. In fact, I would like for them to say, okay, if this happens on the last lap, or if this happens on the last lap, it's an automatic caution. So that way the fans at home and in the stands know, we saw a car hit a catch fence. Caution's got to come out for that. Totally fine with that. Or, there is a car upside down. Yes, throw a caution for that. But when you have a wreck of this magnitude at this kind of a track, what good does throwing the caution do? Genuinely. You're not going to get the caution out in enough time that it's going to get everybody to actually slow down and go to caution pace. So it doesn't really make sense to me on the final lap when we throw the caution in general in a lot of instances, and tonight was the perfect encapsulation of that.
A lot of discussion across social media about this topic in the chat room. A couple of chats already from Dylan. Howdy, gang. Thank you for tuning in as always. Ben, whether you agree with tonight's call or not, our officiating needs a complete overhaul. consistently inconsistent comes up every single week. And Adam agreeing with Ben right there. I encourage everyone to keep sharing your comments, opinions with us. And Tanner, I have to echo, I think everything you said. I am starting to get to the point where at first I believed the idea that, okay, every crash is different, every scenario could be different, the tracks, it's hard. But I'm to the point where it's like, here we are. This was as we were approaching turn 3. This all started occurring. This didn't seem like Daytona where you had some cars like Riley Herbst, who was clearly far behind and was going to be coming up to a big crash. Everyone was, for the most part, pretty condensed. They should have just let the 3 go out there, race to the finish. I wonder if there's a way NASCAR could consider something like, if the caution comes out but it's behind the leaders, whoever's ahead of caution to keep racing. If NASCAR says, but that's going to be something NASCAR has to make it, like you said, hyper specific. They can't just say that, then something occurs and, oh, well, we didn't know. It's like you have to address that each and every week at the drivers meeting. For this track, if this crash occurs and you have 5 or 6 cars, depending on the track, ahead of the crash, you all are still racing to the finish. Everybody else behind, and we're coming from I think we sometimes forget we have the safety improvements from the 90s by far. Back then, it was just we were racing to the car. There was no button. It was the start-finish line. That was it. With the safety advancements, I could see where if NASCAR was to say in the last lap, we will try to let you all race back to the line as much as possible, especially if the crash occurs mid-pack further back, or somebody at the front spins, but they go down to the apron. Like if Ryan Blaney's crash was on the last lap, don't throw the caution. I say, let them race back to the finish line. Ryan Blaney would hate that, but just the way it would go. So overall, NASCAR has to do something. We just cannot. Granted, this is 2 drafting style, super speedway, mini super speedway. You get the big pack. I highly doubt this will happen in Circuits of America, but you just never know because we've seen the road courses sometimes have unpredictable finishes.
Indeed, we have, and those infuriate me on a different level, but we can talk about that probably next weekend. So, yeah, unfortunately, but yeah, it would be nice if there was a little bit more clarity in the NASCAR rulebook. I think that it would behoove the officiating crew that, obviously have the ability to pull the caution lever or not. Because after these past 2 weeks, and you can even take it back to the duels, we've just had way too many questionable calls back to back to back to back to back in all 3 series. It's actually pretty impressive how we've managed to keep circling back to this issue, because NASCAR continues to be inconsistent and not really do anything about it. Now, one thing I will point out is that Elton Sawyer did say this morning that they did mess up in the Xfinity race's finish, and that if a similar instance were to happen in the Cup race, they would throw a caution. But I don't think that's what anybody wants. I really don't. Like I said, I think if there's a car that doesn't have wheels on the ground, or if there's like a catch fence exposed, by all means, throw a caution, because that presents a safety hazard that could be very, very bad. But what we've seen out of the crashes that we've had over the past couple weeks, I can't really say that we really needed to pull the caution when it was the last lap anyway. So we'll have to see how they react going forward, and I look forward to reacting to the reactions.
It's going to be one of those weeks leading up to Circuits of America, and tech has been completed. No issues. Christopher Bell, officially your winner. Awesome. Busch, Smith, those cars are going to R&D Center for teardown. So no changes in the results coming in the chat room again. Ben, I also just hate that even needs to be a conversation. If we could just get through the last lap cleanly, we wouldn't need to be having this discussion. And
yes,
I know with these style of races, with the drafting and the packs, Well, we seen there was a couple close calls, and even Barry, he had a close call where I thought he was going to take out. I believe it was Chastain that he hit as he was moving down low. He got the left rear of Chastain, and I thought Chastain was going up to the wall. He saved it somehow. We had a lot of close calls, but just seems like in that last lap, even more cautions thrown to the wind from the drivers. And then next, we got the caution flag being tossed out by the race officials. Let's see what's going to happen with Circus of America's next draft pack course race will be at Talladega quite some time from now. And of course, for Christopher Bell, well, now his season mentality changes because now he is locked into playoffs. Try to just get the win, get those stage points, race as hard as you can. But that means Ford, despite the strong effort at Daytona, they were strong again here at Atlanta. They are winless after two strong races. Chevrolet getting a win with a last lap pass. And Christopher Bell, he only led one lap today, last lap at Atlanta. That was it. Team Penske's day started with all three cars up front. You got to include in there Josh Berry, Wood Brothers Technical Alliance. He got stage one win. What an effort by that team. But then next we saw it reduced down when Logano fell towards the back. Could not work his way to the front. His car just did not seem to like that dirty air. Then we saw Ryan Blaney get spun out by Carson Hocevar. He comes in, he gets fresh tires, he works his way towards the front, but just came up a little bit short. Austin Cindric, that left him and Kyle Larson almost nearly collided, but he goes into the wall, gets William Byron. Those two crash out, and Cindric was not happy at all with Kyle Larson's move, saying that Kyle Larson was not clear. Kyle Larson looked like he was just moving him up, ran him out of room. This move, similar to what was discussed in Daytona, the self-clearing. Some have been critical about this move. Do you feel Larson's move was fair, just coming down towards the end, or was that uncalled for?
So the issue of self-clearing goes back to at least when Ross Chastain and Denny Hamlin had their little powwow at Pocono back in 2022, because Denny essentially claimed that what Denny did to Ross at Pocono is what Ross had been doing to people all season, where he cleared up into the car higher than him and put them in the wall. And since then, in this next gen era, we've had a number of incidents where this particular unfortunate issue keeps coming up. You can look at Hamlin mirroring that same move at Pocono the following year, and with Kyle Larson, who, again, Hamlin accused of doing that throughout the year. And you can go back to 2022, where that Las Vegas skirmish between him and Bubba Wallace took place, to really go back and, kind of peel the layers back on this whole clearing yourself issue. But I say all of this to say that if it were me, I don't think I would put my competitor in the wall with 4 laps to go on a super speedway track and potentially risk wiping out the rest of the field, which is unfortunately what Kyle Larson did. Thankfully, we didn't have more than 2 cars get involved in that incident, but it was a very unfortunate end for Cindric and William Byron, who was trying to make it 2 in a row. I don't really care for that kind of move, period, but I really don't care for it at a track like this, where the consequences of such a minor action seemingly can have such a major reaction amongst the field. Like, if they did this for 25th, obviously we would call it goofy and whatnot, but we also saw this happen at the front of the field, where, like I said, it has more inherent risk, not only for the car being put in the wall, but the car that put the other car in the wall. So I don't like the maneuver. I think that Larson's better than to be racing like that, and I expect a little bit better from somebody that's a champion of the sport. But at the same time, this is just kind of what super speedway racing is starting to become, because it's so hard to pass. Now, That may not be as much of an issue at Atlanta as it is at Talladega and Daytona, but it reeked of desperation, and that's just not something I really associate Kyle Larson with. So, needless to say, I was a bit disappointed by the move.
I was surprised by that move at that time because I just felt okay. You took out William Byron, who was essentially your teammate. He could have helped push you there. We didn't have really, if I could recall, because at that point Ryan Blaney had gotten spun. He wasn't exactly in the picture yet. You had more Chevrolets. Really, it was only Josh Berry that was around him that could have done anything to try to help Cindric. We could have had a great finish, just those two, but just to make that move, collect your teammate, and this track, I think folks forget, it's much more narrow than what it used to be. We could have had a huge pile up. And I know if that was a driver such as a Ricky Stenhouse, everybody would be critical of that move.
They were earlier in the race.
They were.
They were, in fact, with another Hendrick car that got the bad end of it. But yeah, like it just confuses me how people will have a problem with something at lap 157 versus lap 257. If you have a problem with it, you have a problem with it. Stop putting qualifiers on it and start calling moves out for what they are. It was a bad move. And it doesn't matter what time of the race it was or who or what got the bad or the good end of it. It was a bad move. And that's really should be the end of it. But unfortunately for some people, they like to hash out all the different minutia involved. So needless to say, I'm not going to be one of those people. I think the move's bad regardless. I thought what Stenhouse did earlier in the race was reckless and goofy, and I thought what Larson did was the same. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's just not good racing, especially at the super speedways, Atlanta, Talladega, Daytona. When you have a package, that's just spelling disaster for the field. As we talked about some of these crashes, that's what sort of also got the worst end for the Ford teams. Of course, Wood Brothers, their strong day didn't end too well with Josh Berry getting that last lap crash. Team Penske, well, they had all three up front, Cindric, DNF. Blaney made up some ground, and Joey Logano car just stalled. It reminded me of like the prior generation of car in the late 90s, early 2000s, where that dirty air and you were just stuck. You could not make your way towards the front. Front row, we did see Todd Gilliam up front, but his day got ruined with a blown tire. But we did not see a whole lot of RFK again. Brad Keselowski, he started towards the back. Just as he's working his way towards the front, he gets collected with Chase Elliott in the crash. Chris Buescher, he then later gets collected in the crash involving Alex Bowman. Overall, were you surprised from the lack of pace by RFK so far this season? Is this any concern about their potential pace overall as a team?
I am of the opinion when you add a third team that it could create a bit of a backup when you first add that team on. I don't think we've seen that thus far with 2311 because obviously we saw that Reddick and Bubba Wallace had pretty strong cars today, whereas Riley Herbst, who is the new third edition, he struggled to, really have a handle on his car, much like Joey Logano. So it makes sense that those two weren't really able to shoot forward throughout the race. And as far as RFK is concerned, I mean, it's super speedway racing, so it's really hard to get a full gauge of what exactly their speed actually is at this point. But like I said, when you add that third car, it can create a bit of a logjam in the facility because you have people that have for the last 5 to 6. I'm trying to think of how long Roush Fenway's been down to 2 cars, but they've had a 2-car team for at least a decade now, it seems. And you get used to the grind with 2 cars, and Now you add a third one that's full time with a whole new team. It's going to shake things up. And places you had speed before, you may not have the next time you go with the third car. And other times you'll go to a track that you didn't have speed at last time, but the third car helps raise the whole program. It's just going to be a learning situation for RFK, and Trackhouse, I think, had a similar issue today. Obviously we saw Ross Chastain and at one point Shane Van Gisbergen up at the front, but Daniel Suarez, who was the defending winner of this event, was mired in the pack all day. So I just think that it's a combination of things with RFK, but I think it all boils down to adding a third car, and that will unfortunately bring a set of complications, and they'll have to work through it. And given what we've seen out of RFK and how resilient they've been throughout Brad Keselowski's tenure as an owner-driver, I have no doubt that they'll get it figured out by the midseason, but I was a little surprised that their teamwork didn't really kick in at any point today to get them up towards the front.
Yeah, they could not get to the front. And I was just sort of surprised because the way last year went, playoff appearance for Brad Keselowski, both of them eventually, having a win that season. I really thought they were going to come out a lot stronger, especially Daytona. That didn't happen. Then, okay, Atlanta, Keselowski has won here. The Penske's are going to be good. He's going to be good. Nothing. We're going to go to Coda. That's not road courses. That's is not exactly. It's not exactly a Brad Keselowski track. Buescher seems to do pretty good on road courses. He might have a shot, but if that Ford is not up to speed, they're missing out on opportunities. And especially if we're seeing the Toyotas, they seem to have a good car all around. Joe Gibbs Racing, Hendrick Motorsports, we know there's going to be some tracks that are going to be hard to beat, especially Martinsville. That's one that Hendrick seems to always be strong at. Some of the mile-and-a-half ovals. And then some of these surprise winners that we're going to get, especially in the road courses, like a Shane Van Gisbergen, AJ Allmendinger, if he has a really good day. If RFK... Hocevar.
After today?
If they have to wait till midseason to get the ball rolling RFK, they might be finding themselves too late, and that's going to be something else. Just winning your in format. We'll see what happens. Of course, 2 winners now. One of them is not Kyle Larson, and I just found it very interesting in the race coverage today from Fox. A lot of talk about his winless streak and these drafting tracks, Daytona, Atlanta, Talladega. They showed he's been in 16 plus crashes in these races. He doesn't seem to have good finishes. They even played a clip of Jeff Gordon in an interview saying, I think it is starting to get into his head that he is not successful on these tracks. I've always said these drivers, they're good at compartmentalizing stuff, not thinking about going out there to race, but could this get into Kyle Larson's head? Because he seemed pretty frustrated after the race, not winning in Atlanta. And could this just essentially be a negative when we enter Atlanta, Daytona, or Talladega?
First of all, I'd like to just say, Jeff Gordon, when your employee is struggling with something, you don't publicize it. I think that's a terrible idea. Outside of that, I don't think it gets to Larson because we have seen him, like let's take Homestead last year. He isn't really afraid to put his car wherever he thinks it needs to go. Unfortunately, sometimes that might be the pit barrels. Other times it might be up against the wall. But if it's how he thinks it's going to go the fastest, that's where he puts it. And that unfortunately gets him into trouble when he's around a bunch of other cars. And that's why at tracks like Atlanta, Talladega, Daytona, he has so much trouble. Not only that, the way Kyle Larson likes to drive is he likes to pretty much wrestle with his car the entire time. He is the kind of driver that loves to, get up on the wheel and saw on it. And that comes at a detriment at a track like Talladega, Atlanta, Daytona, because you are surrounded by 30 other cars trying to do the exact same thing that you are. Whereas at another track like Richmond, for instance, you're not going to have that problem. So I just feel like it kind of goes against his skill set. If you look at all of the like great dirt track racers that have come through the sport, like in the last 20 years or so, Tony Stewart comes to mind. He was not particularly strong at these drafting style tracks. Casey Kane, not exactly strong at these tracks. I wouldn't call Tyler Reddick a ringer, or Christopher Bell, today's winner, a ringer at these kind of tracks. I think that it kind of goes against how those drivers approach a race and what it takes to win them. And I think that's kind of where they fall into the most trouble. So I definitely think it might be getting to Kyle Larson, especially if someone as close to him as Jeff Gordon is publicly broadcasting to the world that it's getting to him that he can't win at these tracks. But I think it would require Kyle and some of the other drivers to kind of completely change their mindset on what they like in that kind of a car and how they approach aggressiveness in those races, because I don't know. We're getting to a point where Kyle Larson is almost 32, I want to say, almost 33. He's been in the sport at this level since 2014. You got to win one on these sooner or later, or you're going to end up like Martin Truex Jr., who never ended up winning at one of the super speedway races. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But yeah, it's starting to look pretty tough for Kyle Larson winning at one of these places. He can put himself up at the front, but I just don't think he has enough experience actually controlling these races to really know what he wants out of his car. And as a result, he gets the results that he gets.
Yeah, it reminds me of almost like besides Martin Truex Jr., a Rusty Wallace as well.
Yes.
Just could not get it done at the super speedways. And of course, Rusty Wallace, you talk about him at super speedways, two clips that pop up, most people's minds are him flipping in the air, once at Daytona, once at Talladega. So he did not exactly enjoy those races. And I'm just curious because Kyle Larson, no doubt, one of the best drivers. Everything he does in dirt, people feel good about him at the Indianapolis 500. Assuming he has another fast car, again, no reason he can't be a winning contender. But it just seems these super speedways, he just cannot seem to put himself in the perfect spot, or something goes wrong. And so close today, just again, though, Kyle Larson, 32 years old, approaching 33. Part of the reason why he didn't win, some are saying, that 22-year-old driver, Carson Hocevar, getting his car up there. He took home second place, pushing his car into the middle. He essentially had to hit the back end of Bell, push Bell high, put himself in the middle. But of course, the caution came out. After the race, Carson Hocevar, he was visited by Ross Chastain. They had a discussion. Then we saw Ryan Blaney talking to him, had a discussion. I really thought we were going to see then Kyle Busch come up and have a discussion. I thought, boy, you're hearing it all at once today. Now we know Blaney got spun by Hocevar, called him a moron on the radio.
Among other things.
Definitely among other things. And we know Kyle Busch, that first stage, he was just livid at Carson Hocevar. One thing I found interesting, though, in the interview after the race, though, Carson Hocevar said a comment essentially that, I didn't know we were racing back to the line, apologizing to Hendrick Motorsports and Kyle Larson. Now, I know the optics are there of he pushed a Toyota and then the caution came out and he took second place. And I recall what happened last year at Daytona, where essentially a Toyota got pushed by a Chevy towards the end. But then we had the mess of Martinsville, where Ross Chastain participated in that plan with Austin Dillon and William Byron got in. Overall, do you have any thoughts more about that statement by Carson Hocevar? And is he just making too many enemies on the track and maybe that was more his thought rather than something related to the manufacturers.
I think that Hocevar has definitely made his fair share of enemies throughout his brief tenure in the NASCAR Cup Series, but if I were him, I really wouldn't be that concerned about it. I think that at his relatively young age, I think he's 21. I think you mentioned he was 22, actually. But regardless, the guy is very, very young, very, very raw, and very, very fast. And with that will come his fair share of mistakes or going too hard at a time when it wasn't really warranted, which is kind of what Kyle Busch was probably pretty peeved about. But at the end of the day, I really don't think that it's in your best interest to mind very much. I mean, we've all heard the infamous story about 1980 where Dale Earnhardt on lap 1, very start of the race at Martinsville, dives 3 wide into turn 1 and takes out 15 cars, to the point that Richard Petty comes and grabs him by the collar in the pits after the race and starts yelling at him. Me personally, I didn't see Dale Earnhardt's demeanor change too much after that, based on all of the races from his era that I've watched. So I think that you should be mindful of what your competitors think of you. But at the same time, I also think that if you rein in your aggression too much, you run the risk of what's happened to Ross Chastain in the past 2 years since his incident with Kyle Larson at Darlington back in 2023, where you take the teeth out of this competitor and he isn't anywhere near as fierce as he once was. And that's not a slight on Chastain. It's just an observation. He has not been the same guy that he was when he made it to the championship for. And I think there might be a pretty definitive reason why that might be. And I think it would behoove Carson to take in all the criticism that he is going to get today, tomorrow, and probably throughout the rest of the week and consider it. But at the end of the day, the moves he made put him in a position to win this race, wrong or not. And that's kind of what you have to focus on is the result. And granted, you really don't want to step on people's toes on your way to that result, but sometimes you've got to crack a few eggs or whatever that old phrase is. So my advice to Hocevar is if you make enemies, that's naturally going to happen. But if someone like Kevin Harvick can become a respected racer after how his career started, anybody can come back from being, persona non grata, so to speak.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks forget about, especially Kevin Harvick.
Kyle
Very
Busch.
respected now. But especially that sophomore season, 2002, when he then got that one race suspension in Martinsville. People said he was a hothead, called him all sorts of names. He got into it with Ricky Rudd at Richmond. Look at his career at big picture, though, and I think Carson said something in his post-race interview. It was on Noah Lewis's YouTube channel. He said, I made a lot of aggressive moves early on in the race, but I learned that to put myself in a winning position at the end of the race. And I feel like that shows, or at least he's telling us, he's doing this because he needs to learn how to put himself in a position to win, because who knows what could have happened if that caution didn't come out. If Christopher Bell, since he had gone to Highline, would he still have the momentum? The side drafting, who was that going to? He just would have never known what could have happened. And it seems like,
unfortunately
for Hocevar, I think he's going to get some of the heat from, he said Chastain knows his number. Kyle Busch, I bet if he really wants to talk, they can figure it out. But I'm hoping he doesn't do what Chastain did after Darlington and then all of a sudden he's missing, because Spire has to be pretty happy. Their best finish for that team on a day where Michael McDowell went laps down, got his lap back, got back on the lead lap.
All 6 of his laps back. that is the funniest stat of the day, I think.
And he clearly outperformed Justin Haley in the other 7 car. He's
Who was nowhere to be seen today.
nowhere. I mean,
or
yeah.
last weekend. I haven't seen Justin Haley at all this year. In fact, Fox forgot that he was driving that car today. And at one point on the ticker, Corey LaJoie's name was beside the 7. So,
oh my goodness.
yeah, like Hocevar this week was definitely the banner driver of the team. And it's important for him to remember that going forward and continue the strong runs.
Exactly. I mean, second top 5 in his career in the Cup Series because he got Watkins Glen last year. He has the talent. I think he does have to learn. He said he has to learn, but if he could do it and not do what Chastain did and do more sort of like a Harvick, don't get that race suspension though. That's not needed, but
no, you want your playoff points.
You want your playoff points, and I think overall it'll be really interesting to see what the Spire Motorsport Group could do for the rest of the season. Overall, this race wasn't anything too chaotic. We know since they introduced this, the fewest cautions we had was 5. The most was, I believe, 10. Stage 1 went caution free. Stage 2, a couple of incidents, including the one that took out Chase Elliott, really out of winning contention, but he was still running out there. We saw handling was an issue, especially towards the end of stage 1. Stage 2, 3, it seems as it got cooler, the handling became less of an issue. So then we had the more grip, the more aggressive moves, and then, of course, that late caution. Overall, I know there was a lot of hype, especially with the finish and the history of Lamb with these great finishes. Did the race deliver on your expectations?
Yes and no. I definitely predicted a bit more of a tame race in our pre-race yesterday, but clearly we did not get that. In fact, I thought it would be closer to the 2023 spring race where Joey Logano controlled the field for much of the day, swept both stages, and won the race. But what we ended up with was a pretty interesting race dynamics-wise. We had a major strategy move towards the end of the second stage that practically flipped the field to start the last 100 laps. That made the pursuit through the field very interesting for drivers like Ryan Blaney, Austin Cindric, who went from, I believe, 32nd to 7th in like 10 laps before another caution inevitably came out. I feel that the race definitely lived up to what most people would consider a great race, but I definitely think that if we're talking about Jeff Gluck's poll, I think a lot of people are going to feel pretty peeved by that ending and will likely vote no because their driver didn't win or they wanted to see the finish play out, etc., etc. Me personally, it definitely met my expectations of what a good race is, but these endings, it's really disappointing to watch these guys who all 36 to 38 of them, they work their whole lives to get up to the Cup Series level, and what do? They crash for 7th on the final lap and ruin the finish. And I know that that's not necessarily important to them, but you're ruining your race. You're ruining your team's week because you have wrecked another race car. You wrecked a bunch of other people's race cars. Like, at a certain point, you've got to realize when the juice is not worth the squeeze. And I feel like that particular metaphor could be very beneficial to hear for much of the Cup Series field, especially after these past 2 weeks. At a certain point, yes, a playoff ticket would be great, but on the final lap when everybody's either doubled up or pretty much single file coming down the backstretch, maybe trying to squeeze into that vaguely car-shaped gap may not be your best decision. Just a thought.
Yeah, I have to say, was disappointing to see that last lap crash. And I get it. It's the last lap. Everyone's just going really hard. But it's like, if the gap's not there, what are we doing? I mean, you, you go for the gap when it's there, but when it's not there and you're trying to force and it's 7th or 8th place, okay, you're not going to get up to 3rd or 2nd unless they crash ahead of you. And then just puts the team behind. I mean, it's unfortunate. I think with like Josh Berry, for example, 25th place finish doesn't show a strong result, a strong finish that could have really catapulted that team to, okay, positive momentum. We got a stage win. We were strong. Now that car that was strong is tore up. Probably should be still good enough for Talladega, but we'll see what happens. It's just, it adds up for these teams, the sponsors and all. It's just not a good way to end it. So
I just think that more drivers would benefit from the thought that a 15th place finish with a relatively clean car is a lot better than 7th, where you may have wrecked everybody, or 25th, where you wrecked yourself. That's just my opinion.
indeed. And overall, the race, well, it was, I liked it when it got a little spread out, but I'm again bummed because we talked about it yesterday. No green flag pit stops occurred.
Nope.
None at all. So we didn't get to see any of the strategy aspect. And I feel that was one aspect I was really excited for, was to see, could the Fords, especially since we had at one point where there were so many Ford drivers up front, get going, see them go longer or all pit sooner. We couldn't see exactly what the tire wear was doing. Didn't seem to be too bad. But we just missed out on some other potential storylines. And instead, it was overall good racing, plenty of lead changes. Well, that's always a good thing. It wasn't a stuck 3 wide like Daytona for a long portion of the race, but even then, we saw how Logano fell mid pack. He was stuck there, but then some cars, Blaney, strong car, could get to the front. Overall, be really interesting to see how folks will remember this one compared to the past ones as we get further away from this.
Yeah, it was really nice to see cars be able to control their own destiny for much of this race. I mean, I don't know about anybody else in our audience or you, Joe, but me personally, as soon as Blaney spun out, I was like, he's going to come back. If they don't wreck him, he will be back up at the front. And my wife was like, I don't think so. It was only like 25 to go. And sure enough, with 5 laps left, where's the 12 car in the top 5? So, yeah, it was nice to see cars be able to determine their own races rather than kind of just being gridlocked into 17th. So, yeah, hopefully they can take whatever they learned today to an actual super speedway and replicate it, because that was great. That's what we want to see. And what we saw at Daytona for much of last week is not exactly what I would like to see.
Exactly. Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how everything's all going to play up next weekend. Circus of the Americas, and it's a brand new course. It's going to be really interesting to see. I
don't know if you saw that 7th turn that they're trying to make the drivers make, but there is no way in heck that they are making that corner cleanly at all on a restart. There's just no way. I don't know if you saw it, but it's literally like this. Like the drivers come out of an S curve and have to completely reorient their car and go straight off the corner. It's going to be a mess. And we're going to talk about it, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. We'll have plenty to talk about next week. Curse, everyone subscribe, hit the bell icon for next week's coverage of the pre-race, the wrap-up, and, of course, we also have IndyCar next weekend as well. This weekend, we also had the Supercar Series. Let's go ahead and bring Kobe in to discuss this Repco Supercar Series and essentially the Thrifty 500. 3 races this weekend, and Cam Waters swept the weekend. 3 races, 3 different finishes, but all of them, once again, Cam Waters being the best out there. Race 1, Cam Waters just went out there, hands down, got the win. But in race 2, contact battling the Triple Eight teammates Will Brown, Broc Feeney, and a last lap pass right on the start finish line as they were approaching it on the main straight. And then the third race, late rain showed up. Everyone stayed out on the slicks because you would just lose too much time. You're trying to make that pit stop. He goes on, gets the win. Kobe, can Cam Waters and that team be strong like this weekend all season long, or can the competition bring the fight, and especially the next race weekend at Melbourne?
Well, Joe, after a weekend like that, I guess you have to wonder: is Cam Waters about to go out there and do his best, Shane Van Gisbergen or Scott McLaughlin, as we've seen in recent seasons, where they just go out there and win almost every race and get us all pick a winner point so we can all add up our scores. No SVG and McLaughlin did that for us, and maybe Cam Waters is going to do the same for this season. But that number 6 Monster Energy Tickford Racing Ford team, they did everything right this weekend. You couldn't ask for a more perfect weekend, and Supercars is actually putting this out. They said that Cam Waters is just the second driver in Supercars history to win all 3 races on a weekend, claimed the fastest lap bonus points, and he collected all 315 points that were possible from the weekend. It's crazy thinking about all the great drivers who have come through Supercars over the years, and only Cam Waters is the second one in history to do that. That's just a remarkable feat there. A full weekend Grand Slam, and if his Tickford team can keep this up throughout the rest of the season, he might just be the one driver to beat. But this was just one race weekend. Sometimes we see certain teams take to certain tracks, and then once you get to another track, Waters might actually be, towards the back end of the top 10, or I don't think he'll be outside the top 10. I think if he does fall off, it will be probably towards the bottom of the top 10 or maybe top 5, something like that. But I still think Cam is going to be one of the top drivers to beat for the championship this year. And in regards to the next race weekend, the Grand Prix at Albert Park, Melbourne, Australia, our own Matt White even said that the Grand Prix track is not really suited to Fords, and Cam Waters is on a Ford. So maybe we'll see the Triple Eight guys get back, because that format is different. With Formula 1 there, Formula 2, Formula 3, and you have some other the sports series as well, because Supercars you can only have a certain amount of time. It's just really quick races. You just go out there. It's just an all-out sprint race, and then you're off the track really quickly. There's not this format for the Grand Prix race weekend is really quick. So I think some other teams could take advantage of that and maybe bring Cam Waters back to earth a little bit. But all in all, I think he has to be really happy. It's crazy, Joe. You mentioned all the different ways that he won this weekend: a race of domination, an exciting finish that we'll be talking about for years, and then the skill that he and the other Supercars drivers showed out there in the rain. It was just a remarkable showing from him all weekend long.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of what Kobe said, I mean, he had a phenomenal once-in-a-generation, perhaps once-in-a-lifetime style of weekend. Cam Waters was unreal quick for much of the weekend, and obviously the way that second race came down to the end, it was obviously very thrilling. But I think had he been able to cleanly maneuver past the Red Bull there with 4 laps to go, rather than unfortunately have that awkward collision happen, I think that he probably would have pulled away in that regard. But I guess we'll never know. As far as Waters' prospects for keeping this charge going, like Kobe said, Melbourne is not really the best track at Albert Park to really give Fords a great chance at fighting for the victory. I think we'll see Will Brown probably, and Broc Feeney as well, start to really mix it up there. But I do think that this is going to be a very strong start to a very good campaign for Cam Waters. I think that the Ford has finally started to, finally get its bearings underneath it, because it seemed like from the outside that much of the domination over the past couple of years, since the next generation of V8 supercar has been instituted, that Chevy has really had a gridlock on championships. So it'll be interesting to see coming up here next week, but I would say that Cam Waters is definitely on his way to a very solid and stout campaign, but the Chevys are right there.
Chevrolet appears to be there. Now, let's talk about some of the top Chevrolets in supercars. You're talking about, of course, Triple Eight Racing, and that finish on race 2, as you mentioned, Kobe, it's going to be remembered for a long time. Talked about. Let's talk about what happened with that contact, as Tanner brought up. That Broc Feeney got spun around by Cam Waters. Now, we've seen this in a couple other series where when a person feel like, oh, to avoid a penalty, slow down, give that position back. Cam Waters sort of did that, but at the end, it prevented Will Brown from getting around. Broc Feeney gets ahead, but then, of course, they're racing again. Really, this had people talking. Obviously, the Triple Eight team felt like he didn't properly redress that position again. Now, this all led up to a fantastic finish compared to, say, a stop and go if Cam Waters did not yield that position. Overall, I got to ask you, Tanner, did the race control make that right call to allow them to race? Or the way Waters handled that situation, should that have been some sort of penalty still?
I'm going to go ahead and qualify this by saying I have not been watching supercars a tremendously long time. So if I say something out of step, please correct me. But from what I've seen from the officiating in that series, it seems like they frown upon excessive contact. And I think that what Cam Waters did would, in a normal circumstance, result in a penalty. However, he elected to kind of sit there and wait for Feeney to get back going again. And I think the whole situation just kind of caught Will Brown completely off guard. He didn't seem like he knew where to go, where to put his car to pass both of them. But I also don't think he wanted to pass Feeney and, take the win from him, because he looked like he had a pretty strong showing there and was leading until about 50 yards from the line, probably. With all that said, I felt that the contact was somewhat excessive, but I also felt that Waters practically parking his car and waiting for Feeney to get back going was an actually exemplary show of sportsmanship that I would love to see replicated in other racing series if it isn't dangerous to do so. At the end of the day, do I think that Waters deserved a penalty? I think the penalty was waiting for Feeney to get back going and ceding the position back and almost losing another position to Will Brown. At the end of the day, I don't think you can really argue with how that finish played out, that we got the wrong ending.
Yeah, Tanner. I actually agree with everything you said, and you're spot on about supercars. Frowning upon contact is not like stock cars. Where if someone gets spun out like that, you're just gonna move on, and I guess the penalty would be you get your face smashed in after the race with someone's fist. That would probably be the penalty in stock car racing. But in supercars, they have a culture of self-policing. Like, they'll see what their driver is going to do before they decide to hand down a penalty. If Cam Waters had continued to go up the road, I really think they probably would have issued him a time penalty for not doing that. But if a driver did what he did, decide to back off and get the position back, then they'll typically decide not to penalize them. And I remember just a few years ago, I don't remember exactly what racetrack it was at. I think it might have been Townsville, but if you're a supercars fan in the chat, be sure to correct me if I don't have the right track. But it was like Shane Van Gisbergen, and I think it was Anton De Pasquale. I think those were the two involved. No, it was definitely SVG, and they were like battling towards the very end of the race, and like in like the final couple of corners or so, the other driver spun SVG out, and then like coming down the front stretch to take the checker flag, SVG wound it up in the right direction again, and then the driver who spun him out actually slowed down, and SVG went around him to take the win. I know that's really hard for the other driver, who I believe was De Pasquale at the time. Yeah, and then Van Gisbergen ended up getting the win there, so there wasn't a penalty in that. I don't believe there was a penalty in that situation, because he, did the right thing there. Just let him have the position back, so it wouldn't further hurt him in the driver's standing. So I think race control made the right decision here to say that we're not gonna do a penalty here on Cam Waters.
Yeah, I think that was the right call as well too. Why have race control essentially call a penalty when, okay, the position was given. They're not going to just, oh, I'm going to slow down, let you by, because if he had just done that, Brown would have gone around. He was really smart at what he did, keeping himself in the fight, and everyone's going to remember that finish. And at the end, this is just one part of that amazing story that leads up to an exciting finish. In the chat room, Adam, what Cam Water did was amazing and incredible. He can give Broc, Feeney, Will Brown a run for the title. And the contact between Feeney, Waters was pure racing. Race control did the right thing. No penalty was the right call. That finish was amazing. Overall, it's going to be really interesting to see how everything's going to shape up this season for Cam Waters. Can that team, Tickford Racing, keep this up all year long? When will Triple Eight come back? Another driver looking for a comeback? Brody Kosecki, 2023 Series champion. 2024 did not go good at all. Missed several races. 17th place in the championship standings last year. Right now, he's in the top 10. First race weekend with Dick Johnson Racing, switching from essentially Chevrolet with Erebus the last 2 years to now a Ford team. Kobe, how would you grade his first race weekend with Dick Johnson Racing?
I'd say it was about average for Brody. It's still weird seeing him in the Chevy Power colors and driving a Ford in that. Because ever since he come to Supercar, I've seen him in a Chevrolet with Erebus. So to see him, in those colors with a different manufacturer, different team, still it seems kind of weird. And also his lead engineer George Commons, who's been with him, for his tenure at Erebus, has followed him over to Dick Johnson Racing. So he has some familiar communications there, and we even reported on Grid Tonight over the winter that Brody was going to be driving an Erebus chassis despite being on a Ford. So he has a lot of familiar tools and voices in his ear over there to, I guess, lessen the transition to a different team. But overall, I think he has to be pleased with how it went. End up getting two top tens, and then one top five there right off the podium in the third and final race of the weekend. I think that Brody and that team's going to continue to get better as the season goes on. But if I were him, I'd be pleased with the way things have gone, especially when you look at how everything went for his teammate Will Davison, who had 2 finishes outside of the top 20, which isn't really the best way to start off a season. And in regards to Will Davison, I honestly believe that this is going to be his final season racing full-time in supercars. It seemed like he's lost a step or two, behind the wheel. And as you get older, you typically see that happen to, happen to all drivers because Father Time is undefeated. And I think that Brody's probably going to, end up being the number 1 driver over there this season. And I don't know if Will Davison's struggles are going to continue throughout the season, but it was not a good race weekend for that team. But I think Brody can be pleased where things are. But obviously he's not going to be happy because he wants to be on the podium. He wants to be up there fighting for the win. But I think that's going to come in due time.
Yeah, I thought that Kostecki made pretty solid advancement throughout the weekend. I mean, obviously we're talking about him jumping into a completely different style of car with coming from Chevy going over to Ford. And, obviously you also have to ingratiate yourself in a new culture. So there's that whole other aspect of it. I think that for a first weekend, yeah, you see another Ford go win and win every race. You wish that Ford was you, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, to come home, I think Kobe mentioned he came home 4th in the final race of the weekend in Sydney. I think you have to kind of take that as a feather in your cap, considering all the circumstances, surrounding moving to a new team. And at the end of the day, I mean, this guy is a series champion. He is very strong. Obviously, he had whatever happened last year happen. And obviously, he is still able to mount a charge and get up to the front. I think that as the season wears on, we'll start to see that familiar shell car start to make its way up to the podium. But again, as we kind of alluded to in the Cam Waters question earlier, I would probably not imagine that happening at Albert Park next week.
Yeah, next race weekend, Melbourne, sharing the weekend with Formula One. It's going to be very exciting to see what all happens in the Repco Supercar Series. Of course, plenty of racing. Encourage everyone to subscribe, hit the bell icon, because next weekend, NASCAR and IndyCar is back. With that said, Kobe, let's start with you for our shiny moment, and we encourage everyone in the chat room share their shiny moment from the weekend.
Well, I think I'm gonna start off with the most obvious one: to finish the race 2 at Sydney Motorsports Park. That was such a spectacular moment, and I think that's one of the first memorable supercars finishes that, like I said, as I said earlier, that we're gonna be talking about for years to come. Just like when we saw Shane Van Gisbergen and Brody Kostecki leaning all over each other at Wanneroo Raceway in Perth, Australia. Just a couple of years ago. That was such an exciting finish that I still remember to this very day. And this one will be very memorable as well, especially at the very end with the great camera work that they were doing, just showing the overhead shot. When I first saw it, I honestly thought that Cam Waters wasn't going to get him at the line, but as you saw right before getting to the checkered flag, Cam Waters perfectly executed the side drive here and slowed down his competitor on the outside, and then just slingshot right around him at the very end. That was such a masterful maneuver there, and it was just a really, really great race. Definitely, in my opinion, the race of the weekend across motorsports.
I couldn't agree more. And just to kind of piggyback off what Kobe said, that helicopter shot towards the end of that race was just phenomenal. What an absolutely perfect camera shot, because it almost made the straightaway at the end feel like it lasted forever, which was honestly what you want to produce when the finish line is going to be coming up at some point. As for my shining moment, it's not something that actually happened on the racetrack, but something that happened on the dotted line. Corey Heim was announced to be 2311 Racing's first development driver this weekend. So he will be picking up select cup dates for 2311, as well as doing some Xfinity Series work for Sam Hunt Racing. And I think this is a very great agreement that's been met here. Corey Heim is easily one of the best prospects in NASCAR at the moment, and getting him settled in, already having a development path carved out for him, that's only going to help his development. And working his way into a team that will have, I would imagine, 2 of the 3 drivers that they currently have, maybe even Denny Hamlin, who knows, one of these days. But having that support network around you, having Michael Jordan believing in you, like, you can't really put a dollar amount on the value that brings to you as an athlete or just a regular human. And I just think that going forward, Corey Heim is going to prove to all of us that he is one of the best prospects we've seen in years, and parlay that into a very successful Cup career. And this is just the beginning of that.
2 very good shining moments. For my shining moment, I'm going to have to go with the winner of the Atlanta race, Christopher Bell. This driver, we know his racing background. It's up there with Kyle Larson with all the dirt track racing and everything. Now he could do the dirt track racing again. He has to be feeling pretty excited. Daytona 500 was up there towards the front. Unfortunately, contact from another driver ruined his day. Comes here in Atlanta. They did not qualify that well, but we all anticipated Toyota's were have something up their sleeves for the race itself, particularly with handling. Was quiet all day, but he put himself in the right spots, working his way towards the front. On a day where we saw some drivers work their way to the front much easier, like a Ryan Blaney, then some, once they lost the front, they were nowhere to be seen, like Joey Logano. Christopher Bell, he kept working his way towards the front. At the end, put himself side by side with Kyle Larson. Anytime those 2 are racing each other, Kyle Larson, Christopher Bell, I just get excited because of the Chili Bowl races they've had against each other, their racing history with each other. 2 great racers are just going to race each other hard. Most part, keep it clean. And overall, it was a bummer. The caution came out. That could have led to a very exciting finish, but still, Christopher Bell, another win. He has to feel pretty good. Hopefully he get back to the championship for it. That's what he's hoping for. We'll see a lot of racing left this year. And of course, we still have a lot of racing to talk about on this program. Tomorrow, Grid Encore, Ben Schneider and Tanner will be on the show as well, making his Grid Encore debut. Then Wednesday, Kobe, as well as Josh Birch and Matt White will be on Grid tonight. Then Thursday, we're getting ready for the IndyCar season. So guess what? The roundtable's back. Yep, Grid Roundtable 2025 IndyCar predictions. If you remember last year's prediction show with Jackson Lambros, Ben Schneider, and Will Power, you do not want to miss this year's program. Thursday, hit the bell icon, subscribe. Then we'll do it all over again. Saturday, Grid Life pre-race for the NASCAR race and much more programming throughout the race weekend. For Kobe Lambert from Grid Tonight and Tanner Smith from the Pit Box Press, I'm Joe San Diego. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.